more than a third of Russia's shadow fleet was made up of ships previously owned by Western ship owners and the very countries that imposed the sanctions in the first place. How do you feel about the role of sanctions, and have they worked in your opinion?
Well, I think
Money makes a world go round. It makes a world go round. Money makes a world go round.
Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML compliance and financial crime to the real world. Since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia became the most sanctioned nation on planet Earth. And those listening who work in first or second line of defense AML will know the efforts put into helping those sanctions become effective to help starve the war machine. So what happens when the US issues a waiver allowing buyers to purchase Russian oil already loaded on sanctioned vessels? We're entering murky legal waters for the flow of money. I'm your host, Robin Lycka, resident sanctions man at Strise, and in this episode we're asking, can you switch off sanctions on a Russian shadow fleet? We'll be discussing how a shadow network was built, the reporting that exposed it, and what happens when an illegal network receives a temporary hall pass. To dive into this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by Kyrre Kjellevold, Associate Professor, University of South-Eastern Norway, and award-winning investigative journalist, and Marina Fridman, data journalist at NRK. Welcome to The Laundry, both of you. Great to have you with us. Can you give our international audience a very brief explanation of your backgrounds on this particular topic?
I worked as an investigative journalist for, 5 years. Before that, I was a PhD student at the Norwegian School of Economics, where I graduated with in financial accounting, believe it or not. So
you have a PhD in auditing and accounting?
As I do, but I'm not the only one. Marina also has a PhD, so we're both PhDs. So, but financial accounting was my main topic, and then for less than a year ago, I started as a freelance journalist and took up a position as an associate professor at the University of South-Eastern Norway. So I love to teach and love to do research.
Hi, my name is Marina, and thanks for having me. My background when it comes to knowledge about sanctions and the shadow fleets came mostly from the project that we worked on with Follow the Money last year. So we did a deep dive into understanding where these ships come from and how it is that they're allowed to operate around the world.
And you've been mentioned as one of the OSINT experts at NRK as well, a data analyst. So I wanted to ask you, can you mention just your top 3 favorite OSINT sources?
Oh, I think that's a very generous description. But OSINT Industries is great. It's a place where you can look up phone numbers and email addresses to link them to other accounts. I think that's the first place I go to. Social media accounts, I mean, it's amazing what people will post. Most gold actually comes from what people are willing to share themselves online. And I'm not sure I have a third one springing to mind, but let me get back to you on that maybe.
Not like marine traffic or any of those
Oh,
ones?
yeah, for ships tracking, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't really think about that as OSINT, but of course, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of information that you considered kind of third party, but it's actually OSINT as well. They're open to everyone. Okay, let's dive into the discussion. Before we get into recent news, let's understand what we're actually dealing with when we say shadow fleet. So the term shadow fleet sounds like something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean, but what does it mean in practice? How many vessels are we talking about here, and where are they operating?
I think, first of all, we need to know that the number of vessels, that's a highly estimate, right? It's hard to really say for certain. But I guess now it's above, they do say about 1,000 vessels currently. And the way of defining shadow fleet, that's even a harder subject, right? How to really define it. People use different definitions, but one definition is all tankers with obscure ownership and not Western insurance. That's one common definition. But we have to remember that the shadow fleet is not something new. It's something, if you look through history with embargoes and sanctions, shadow fleets have risen to the occasion, right? During the Civil War, British cotton merchants found ways to circumvent the sanctions against the southern states. During the Prohibition era, rum runners found ways to circumvent the prohibition on rum. So basically, it's something that comes as a reaction to sanctions and embargoes against countries.
Mm. And was the shadow fleet? You kind of mentioned it there that it's been operating for a long time. But how did it change after Russia became the most sanctioned country on earth after the invasion of Ukraine? How quickly did it grow, and how did it change due to those sanctions?
Well, I think it grew very rapidly. Basically, because before 2022, when we talked about shadow fleets, we mainly talked about the Iranian shadow fleet, Venezuelan shadow fleet, right? But then after 2022, it suddenly exploded, right? With as we're going to talk about today, how the ships multiplied very rapidly. Some states that Craig Kennedy at Harvard states that that Russia used over $10 billion to finance these vessels accusations.
Yeah. And Marina, how was this something that came to your attention? How do you even begin investigating something as informal or off-grid as a journalist?
So this was something that was started by our collaborators, if I'm not mistaken, by Follow the Money. And the idea is exactly as you mentioned before, there is a lot of OSINT available tools to see where ships are moving. So we could see that their ships were still going between Russia to their clients that were buying oil in India and China. You could see that they continued moving through European waters. The question was, were they evading sanctions and who owned these ships? So trying to find owners and trying to find information about who insured them and what flag they have, that's generally available through different providers of maritime information, but actually checking and seeing whether that information is up to date, that was involved some extra tricks and sources, of course.
Okay. Is this kind of the secret sauce of investigative journalism, or could you share a bit more about the tools and methods that you used?
I think so. For the information that is available openly, that is happy to be shared. There's websites like Equasis, Marine Traffic is of course a big one, but I think at the end of the day, the real insights, the most like convincing nuggets come from talking to people, and Kyrre is the master of finding people who are interested in sharing their stories.
Yeah, for being an accountant and auditor, I do like to talk to people. That's true.
Is that you have to have some kind of friendly demeanor about you, though, because I think like most people have a bit of a negative connotation when the auditor rocks into their office and just wants a lot of information. How do you go about your methods when establishing a relationship if you're in conversational scenarios?
Well, I do not start with saying, "Can I look at your numbers?" That's for sure, and not mentioning tax. That's also a key thing. But usually, I start by trying to connect to people. I think the human way is basically to find some common ground before you start any conversations, and you have to remember that you are not the one who should be doing the talking in a way, but you have to be able to share something of yourself to basically get some information that's useful, but also that meaning that the person that you're trying to communicate with feel safe and acknowledged. But basically from there, it's just go by feeling. I think many people think it's scary to meet foreign people or people you haven't met before. So as a PhD student, I had to go to conferences meeting these American professors who were, well, used to people respecting their their stature a lot more than in Norway. So perhaps it's easier from a Norwegian standpoint because we're not usually used to that people using the class and status as much as in other countries. So we go directly to people and speak directly. I think that also helps.
I agree with that. I've had the same experience, like not being accustomed to the hierarchical approach of conversations. But through your reporting for NRK and Follow the Money, you revealed some pretty uncomfortable truths. You found that more than a third of Russia's shadow fleet was made up of ships previously owned by Western ship owners. And the very countries that imposed the sanctions in the first place were the origins of these ships. How did that happen?
Oh, that's a good question. Because basically, one way of looking at it is that we had a lot of ship owners having an old fleet, right? Ship owners has to rotate their ships, right? Because when they get a certain age, there is a risk of course, spills, which is also a high maintenance cost. That means that having them is not so economical. So there's always going to be a marketplace for old ships in a way, but that marketplace, or for scraping old ships, but that market grew enormously after 2022 when you look at prices. So basically, prices for 15-year-old Aframax tankers, it just blew to the sky, right? In a matter of year or months. I'm not sure how fast, but it grew very fast. And then, of course, it created an incentive for ship owners to sell away a lot of their assets for a very good price. So I think the economic incentive is very much in the forefront there. And then, of course, there were sanctions against selling directly to Russia. But we know also from other reporting before we started our project that Russia was very, very good at creating a distance between themselves and the transactions, basically by using third-party countries and flag states with obscure that make it very hard to find the ownerships. So basically, when you were, say, a Norwegian ship owner, okay, I'm not selling to any Russian sanctions or any Russian entities, but I'm selling to this company. I haven't seen it before, and it checks out basically by just looking briefly at Google or Orbis that it doesn't have any sanctions risks involved on it with it. So I think then they weren't incentivized to look through every stone in a way. And I have some examples if you want to hear. Yeah, I can use an example from a well-known Norwegian ship owner called Trond Moen, which we reported a lot on our first stories. So basically, he had 5 ships, which he had for an asset play, basically, in his own words. That for the value, that means that he had it for value increasing, just to keep it appreciating in value. So when the time came to sell the assets, of course, the timing was very good, right? The time was very good in 2022, late 2022, 2023 to sell the assets. So then he sold asset to someone called Bekmesi family. It was two former. They started in the cotton industry, in fact, creating underwear and socks. But basically, both brothers.
I actually thought that would be a lot worse when you said they started in the cotton industry. I'm sorry. But okay, so garments.
Yeah, they're not from Alabama.
Okay, textiles, good.
Exactly, textile, yeah. So they started out in the textile industry, but then the brothers started buying ships, and one of the brothers that Trummo sold to, it was in fact the first ship he bought. In fact, so he was a new ship owner. But basically, his brothers had already been in the business for some time. And we found out that his brother had been traveling with from Russian oil to Turkey at the same time as Trummo sold his vessel. So that means that if he had, would he then be, okay, so if you look at the checklist, okay, so this is a known owner, but he's operating from Turkey. At that time, it was well known that Turkey was a destination for Russian oil, one of the major trading partners for Russian oil. A Google search would also reveal that his brother was had done trades with Russian oil. But basically, we got to see the checklist they used for the due diligence, and basically it was only an Orbis search. So how incentivized was the Western owners in really looking closely at who they sold their vessel to? And Michelle Brockman, who is a well-known analyst for now, I'm not sure where she works now, but she used to work for Lloyd's List. She, as you said, like, if you know why the prices are rising, there is a big demand. Why do you not check closer who you sell to? And she, as well as us, points to the economic incentives. They were the prices were skyrocketing so high, and of course the legal part is how much are they obliged to search for other informations. Even Norwegian Lawyer Association thinks that the rules should be stricter for.
And you kind of have those adjacent industries as well, like you mentioned, law firms, insurance, etc. So, Marina, one of the things that I was kind of shocked about was the finding of false insurance. So this company, Marine, was exposed for issuing fraudulent insurance documents to over 100 tankers in the Russian shadow fleet. So this is one of the enablers that allows them to bypass Western sanctions. And fun fact, I actually usually pass by that office every day. And there was this super interesting thing where they actually stole an address, or kind of just they pretended to be at this very prestigious Oslo address at the Norwegian Shipping Association. So can you explain a little bit about P&I insurance, why it matters for sanctions, and how it was being falsified?
Yeah, the story with Marina was really crazy. I felt like everything that we unearthed, every step closer we got, we just kept finding more and more falsifications and fraud. So that was a lot of fun to investigate. But yeah, so P&I insurance is like the marine liability insurance that protects ship owners and operators. Just like, having a car, if you have a ship, you need to insure it. And what I guess is maybe surprising for many people, or was certainly for me, is that ensuring compliance with sanctions falls a lot to the insurance companies, because it's the insurance companies that don't want to take the risk of having a sanctioned vessel. So they actually ended up on the front lines of enforcing sanctions compliance. And then who enforces that the insurance has done a good job? Well, that would be the flag states. So the flag states, those are the ones that say, like, okay, the ship, it's flying our flag, and we have validated that the insurance is doing a good job, and we've checked all the specifications. So we are sort of vouching for the safety of the ship. And there's different types of insurance. There's insurance to protect the crew, the cargo, pollution in the case of oil spills, collision liability, and wreck removal in case something happens to the ship. And it used to be that most flag states would require Western shipping insurance. The Western world really dominated the maritime insurance space. But for the shadow fleet vessels, one after another, they were getting kicked off of the Western insurance rosters. And so they had a problem. They needed to show an insurance company that that flag states would accept. And Rømerine, which we eventually realized was being operated, like their website was being hosted by Russian servers, and the person in charge, the head of the company, was also a Russian national. But they were advertising a Norwegian, or they were advertised as a Norwegian company. They had Norwegian colors. They had runes in the design of their logo, like everything to evoke this Nordic reputation, which has been very respected in the space of maritime shipping.
Yeah, so those runes in the logo, that should have been the first red flag because, as a Norwegian, you probably avoid that for the risk of being seen as nationalist. But yeah, it's super interesting, and there are multiple Norwegian large insurance companies, which they've taken a lot of heat for not leaving Russia. I think several of them probably still surface on websites like leaverussia.org. You have large marine insurers like Guard and Skuld, but they have very good reasons for not being able to pull out completely. So I know this story from someone I know within insurance that if a crew member falls ill and they have to pay the insurance policy to the family, it's actually become a whole nother cumbersome part of paying out their insurance, where they have to have partner banks that are in the adjacent countries, typically the Stan countries. So you pay a bank in Kazakhstan who pays the family in Russia. So it's a whole adjacent industry, but that's also for the good of sanctions avoiding as well. It's not sanctions avoidance. It's more like you have to add new processes due to the sanctions.
Yeah, and you can imagine a sort of parallel, but in the other direction, series of issues if you were to have Russian insurance of the vessels. That's one of the reasons. Like, if you have an accident happening somewhere in European waters, an oil spill, for example, a lot of these shadow fleet tankers, they engage in a very risky operation called ship-to-ship transfers, where they, to obscure the origin of the oil, they'll transfer the oil from one ship to another in the middle of open seas. But that's a very risky undertaking. And say that ends up in an oil spill, and okay, the ship is insured by a Russian insurance company, but then how are they actually going to pay out to European countries? I mean, a lot of the banks and financial structures have been disconnected. But yeah, I just wanted to follow up really quickly your comment about how the runes wouldn't sit well with an actual Norwegian audience. So one of the fun things we discovered was that the whole design of the website and the branding was made by a company in St. Petersburg. So yeah, it's not an accident that looks weird to a Norwegian audience.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kyrre. I see you have a point.
No, this story was probably one of the most interesting stories I ever worked with, because basically it had so many dimensions. If you look at Andrew Mokalin, the owner of Rømerine, he previously worked for a Norwegian. How do you say that? They sold ship insurance, the insurance broker, Norwegian insurance broker. So he had a lot of extensive experience with that company, and he even had two of the Norwegians leading from that company in as a board members of Rømerine for a long time before they pulled out. And of course, the Norwegians are under police investigation now for charged with possible sanctions violation, criminals, or how do you call it, sanction law breaking, or how to say that. But I think that's a key thing, which is still unknown, whether how much the Norwegians actually participated in this company or not. And that's, of course, the reporting is still not finished. The journalists are still working on this.
Yeah, super exciting. The US has loosened sanctions that prevented other countries from buying Russian oil and petroleum already loaded on vessels at sea. This is to try and ease the energy supply crisis sparked by the US-Israeli war with Iran. And the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said it was a short-term measure aimed at promoting stability in global energy markets. What was your initial reaction on hearing this news from the US?
I'll let Marina answer that first, since she's American.
Uh, well, I mean, I think my initial reaction, I honestly, I wasn't sure how much of an impact this would have. It seemed a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. But there are so many specifics about, what had happened in recent times that, of course, it makes sense. Like they had one of the biggest releases of oil stocks recently in another effort to try to alleviate the situation. So it does make sense that, you want to release oil and let it flow into the system to see if that can sort of buffer the shocks that are happening. But yeah, Shadow, what did you think?
No, it's just that as an economist, I don't think this is going to have a big impact on the oil price. So I'm, as an European, I think this is giving Putin a better hand and having no long-term impact on the oil price.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
me, I feel like there's something more like looming under the surface here. There has to be another reason why, another incentive to why, because obviously the US knew what would happen with the attack on attack from Israel. They were part of supporting it, so they knew that oil prices would surge. They know what will happen, but lifting the sanctions like just a little bit, it just shows that sanctions, to me, it shows that, or it at least points towards sanction being more like political leverage. Like, we can help you. We can lift these sanctions. Look at what happens if you're able to let those 150 million barrels of oil flow freely now that they're at sea. So they just put that kind of lifted sanctions if they're already loaded. That's just a little tag on appendix to the lifting. But to me, it just has to be a bigger reason why they're doing this. But while the US is easing these sanctions, the EU and UK and other allies have not followed suit. So does this leave the Shadow Fleet in some sort of legal gray zone?
Well, if you ask the UK and EU, they would say no to that, right? Because their sanctions it's in fact increasing, right? They put up more vessels on the sanction list every opportunity they get. So at least from a European standpoint, we would say that it's not relaxing, right? But it creates a very messy environment, right, for those working in money laundering. The funds would still be illegal if they were from a sanctioned vessel, but how to then evaluate the risk of vessel not on sanctions but allowed by the US? I think that's kind of the gray area there. Is going to be very hard to operate in.
Yeah. While you're probably still actively working and looking at this, do you happen to know where any of these tankers have gone? Like, I would have assumed straight to India, like where they would usually go anyway, but now they can go to India and they don't have to do the whole bypass and re-refining and selling back.
Yeah, I do think that that's sort of where the predictions are of where the most of that oil is going to be sold to, because, most of this oil was going to India already for years, but now in the past months, there was a recent deal that would stop, right? That India would stop buying Russian crude. And now in this sort of about face, now they don't have to. I mean, it's really unclear what would have happened with that oil. Like, would have that have become more hidden, or would it still have kept flowing? But now it can just be sold in the open, and I think that it's created a very interesting, space.
Yeah, it's not like the Prometheus will rock up outside of Stavanger and then suddenly we will buy Russian oil directly. So the proceeds, you mentioned this already. So if the oil was moving in the shadows, but it's now temporarily legitimized, what happens to the sort of financial flow around it? So these proceeds, they can't be treated as compliant. They're still high risk.
Yeah, exactly. So this is gray area, as you point to, right? Because if the vessel is sanctioned, okay, then it's over, then it's crystal clear, right? But if it's not sanctioned, then but still, you still have the intact infrastructure, right? The obscure ownership, the insurance things, all those risks. So to me, at least, it seems quite clear that it shouldn't change so much, right? The risk should be the same.
And could it be argued, though, that this temporary waiver can give us a better understanding of the shadow fleets and its patterns? You know, the teams that are actively working on this use satellite tracking, open source data analysis. I've seen these calculations where they look at the ship as it enters an harbor and as it exits, and then look at the displacement and calculate the shadow to figure out the displacement and how much oil they would be carrying if they've done an STS or anything within a harbor. But is this a chance to see what's going on in the dark, or will the shadow fleet just keep operating in the same way as they've always done?
It's hard to say how exactly this waiver will affect the trade. Like we mentioned before, a lot of the mechanisms that are actually shady, and the fact that they have insurance from companies that wouldn't be accepted in the West, that's unlikely to really change in the space of 30 days. And a lot of the ships do still operate with AIS on, this automatic identification system. So it might give us a hint, but it's hard to really anticipate what exactly is going to look different. At least hard for me to speculate.
So the world of shipping has been across the news lately with Iran, Venezuela, and the issue at the Strait of Hormuz. But what role do you see that the Russian shadow fleet is playing in this conflict, especially with Iran as a close ally?
No. I think just this. Well, I think it's important to know that after these years since 2022, the whole infrastructure has changed, right? We're seeing two different shipping worlds in a way, right? Those who follow the sanctions and those who doesn't follow the sanctions. And I think the question is whether it's going to continue being two separate worlds, right? Something we looked at with now, of course, the flag states have been, and this is also after reporting on Royal Marine, right? The flag states have been delisting a lot of sanctioned ships. But still, what we found in our reporting was that the flag states didn't do much due diligence regarding the insurance provider, right? So and now we also see that they're coming fake flag states, ships registering on in previously totally unknown flag states, and even using flag states that they aren't aware of they're using the flags, right? So they even fake that they are having the flags from respected flag states. So we're seeing a totally different environment. So I think we should look further than just the Iran crisis to look how the shipping has really changed in a way.
Okay, so zooming out from this, as someone who has looked into the shadow fleet in great detail and all the loopholes and issues and where the Westerners should turn the blind eye, how do you feel about the role of sanctions, and have they worked in your opinion?
I don't think you can have a price cap, even though they've lowered the price cap now. I think it's 43 or something. or 42. So they lowered it, but still, if the ones reporting the prices are the same ones traveling the merchandise, it's not really an effective scheme, right? At least from an economist's point of view, it creates strange incentives. It's the same as reporting on a home exam whether you cheated or not. It's not really the best way to discourage it, in a way. But Marina, I think you also have some thoughts.
I mean, yeah, I think what we've seen is that throughout these years, Russia has continued to export as much oil or close to. I guess it's declined a bit, but the recent declines we're not even sure are really due to the sanctions. So it's hard to say that it has had an effect. What it has, I mean, it has had an effect. Let me correct myself. It has had an effect in that it has created this alternative parallel world in shipping. I'm not sure that was the effect that was intended. The intent was to squeeze the Russian treasury and to reduce Russia's ability to wage war in Ukraine. And I don't think it has had the intended effect.
Yeah, it's definitely created some very interesting scenarios. I think what's very different with ships is that they do tend to change owners more than companies. And the fact that the names of the sanctioned vessels is actually what you use for screening. So there's probably the most obvious example is the vessel that I mentioned earlier, Prometheus, which changed its name. I think it's called the Varuna, Prometheus, just a bunch of random names, and it just the from a data perspective, the task of screening those names is so exponentially more difficult when you just change the name of the vessel, change your flag of convenience, change the owner. And then actually the easiest way to spot it is just looking at the photo, because it's a lot more expensive to paint the entire ship than to just change the name and the flag of convenience.
At least from our data perspective, I don't think we ever used the name aside for when we were writing the story. We always use the IMO number, which is like this unique identifier. Because the name, they come up with a new one. It's like just up to your imagination. But go ahead, Kyrre. What were you going to add?
No, it's exactly what you're saying. That basically, did you see that Venezuelan story where they was followed by U.S. vessels and they changed, they painted the ship under pursuit with the Russian flag.
Yeah.
So that, but there was this one story like I wanted to tell basically when we were investigated why this happened, how intricate the whole buying of vessel was. So basically, when Lukoil, they had an ingenious way of structuring the payment. So basically, they created a company that chartered vessels on such contract that is financed the vessels. And Financial Times had this very interesting story about this guy called John Ormerod, this British accountant, which basically bought vessels for Lukoil. And one of the vessels he bought was basically from Bergen in Norway, later called Ocean Faith, that basically a Swedish investor bought a vessel in Norway for 279 million kroners, and it's 8 months later sold it to Ormerod for 432 million. So he had a gigantic value increase on just 8 months. But it just so that Lukoil used this straw man which is now under scrutiny by the UK government to buy up vessels. The whole intricate, and then of course we asked this Swedish investor whether, well, this kind of price increase in 8 months, should that raise any flags? And there was some strange anomalies with these accountants, but basically that's something with the reporting, which I think is important to say. In reporting on shipping industry, we, as Marina stated, we get to all these barriers based on opaque ownership. We can't get information out from the flag states, we have to rely on sources inside. And for reporting on raw marine, for example, we relied on very brave Russian sources, right? That risked a lot more than us to kind of give us information. So I think I previously should have stated this, that this reporting basically is a sum of a lot of international sources as well that risking a lot more than us Norwegians sitting here in the comfort of Norway.
Super interesting stories. Before we end this episode, we're going to dish out some quick fire questions for you. Quick fire meaning very short answers. Kyrre, you answer first, then Marina second. Who ultimately created the Russian shadow fleet?
Putin's government, no doubt.
Yeah, came from Russia. Was built by Russia with the help of opportunistic European ship owners.
And how do you track a shadow fleet?
Well, you use, as Marina said previously, you use a lot of sources like Global Fishing Watch, Vessel Finder, Marine Traffic to try to follow it. But they use all this automated information. They kind of like they take off their tracking devices, so you see all these strange patterns.
Marina, how do you track a shadow fleet?
No, I agree. You type in the IMO number and watch the ship pop up on Marine Traffic, Global Fishing Watch. If it doesn't pop up there, you look for it with satellites.
Okay, let's switch it off. Marina, you go first. What's the real-world consequences of Russia still shipping oil globally?
Russia is making a ton of money, especially now, and it's able to continue funding its war in Ukraine, and it's creating a parallel shipping world.
And lastly, can you switch off sanctions on this network?
No.
No, I don't think so. I think what we've seen is created as we stated before, like a parallel shipping industry. And I think we should learn from history that basically when you create sanctions, you create sanction evasions, right? It's just economic forces. When the cotton prices rises, it was very, very beneficial for British merchants to circumvent the northern states' naval embargoes. We've seen that even in old-time Greece, that basically it's really hard to create sanctions that are really effective in shipping.
And that brings this spin of the laundry to an end. Kyrre and Marina, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find and connect with you?
Thank you. I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to receive messages there.
Same with me, LinkedIn or just Google, and you'll find the contact information.
Thank you all for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, check out the back catalog of more than 150 episodes and follow The Laundry on your podcast platform of choice. Please share the podcast on your social media channels. Tell a colleague to subscribe. Maybe give us a 5-star rating. It really helps people to find us. Got something you want to share with us? Comment on the Strise LinkedIn, my LinkedIn, or email laundry@strise.ai. The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the autonomous fin crime department. Visit strise.ai for more information and see you next time.